Hi there, and welcome to Publishing Power. I'm Joellen, your host with First Editing. Today we have Teresa de Grosbois, who is an international speaker sought by entrepreneurs and large corporations who want to better understand how local gossip can suddenly turn into epidemic word of mouth, which of course we all want with our books. Specializing in the topics of influence and success, Teresa has a proven track record in understanding the word of mouth epidemics that have taken her 3 books to bestseller status in only 8 months, and that's what we want to know more about today. Teresa teaches business and marketing courses around the globe, including teaching courses to startup entrepreneurs in developing countries. As the chair of the Evolutionary Business Council, Teresa leads an international invitation-only council of speakers and influencers dedicated to teaching the principles of success. And we'll tell you more about that, but if you'd like to learn more, please visit Teresa at www.wildfirews.com. Hi, Teresa.
Hi, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. This is exciting, and of course, I reached out to you because of your bestseller status and your courses, and I just thought you could share with us today a little bit about all of that. And can we start with the basics of what is a best-selling book?
Oh, I love that question because so many people have so many different opinions on that, you know. And it's true, there's a lot of debate in the industry on what is the definition of a best-selling book. And you'll tend to find that there's 2 distinct schools of thought on this. In the self-publishing industry, they have one school of thought, and in the traditional mainstream publishing industry, they have another. So if you're talking to people in the self-publishing end of the industry, they tend to tell you as soon as you've sold so many books, you're automatically a best-selling author. They'll say 2,000, 4,000. Apparently in Canada, we have our own number, but nobody agrees with that number is either. And if you're in the mainstream publishing industry, to be a best-selling author, you have to be on one of the recognized bestseller lists. And there's 5 main ones: New York Times, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Wall Street Journal, and USA Today. At least in North America, those are the 5 dominant ones. There are other lists in Europe as well. But getting onto one of those lists, especially getting to number 1 on one of those lists, is really what defines a best-selling author in the minds of anyone in the mainstream publishing industry.
Of course. And how do you get your publishers to pay attention? I mean, what are the publishers looking for when they're looking at these books?
You know, it's interesting because publishers are really looking for 2 things, and authors don't always understand that. The first is they're looking for an amazing book. You know, quality is never negotiable. Publishers want a beautifully written book that's engaging, that's going to leap off the shelves at people. Quality can't be compromised. But the second thing they're looking for is authors that can really help promote the book. So they're looking for authors who understand what creates word of mouth epidemics and understand that it's their job to market the books even more so than it is the publisher's job.
Of course. And how do the bestseller lists work now? How exactly do they work for us?
Well, it's interesting because they all work a little bit differently, but all of them are based on some kind of algorithm that is the most books sold over a specific period of time. And for example, New York Times is the most books sold over an entire week or a 2-week period, depending on which New York Times list you're talking about. And that they measure at pretty much every point of sale in North America. Like they measure all books sold on Amazon, on Barnes & Noble, and on the big box stores, as well as 200 independent points of distribution in North America. So New York Times is a major effort in data collection. Amazon, of course, is just measuring books sold on Amazon. And Amazon's algorithm is secret, but anyone in the industry can kind of guess it's some combination of most books sold overall times most books sold in the last week times most books sold in the last hour. And Amazon, like Barnes & Noble, updates their list every hour. And so actually, if you push a lot of traffic at one of those sources and do it very quickly, it's possible to see very rapid movement in the numbers on those lists.
Okay. So of all these lists we're talking about, which are the best ones for us to try to get on as an author?
Well, you know, the answer to that is it depends, you know, and I do a lot of surveying on this because I really want to understand how the general public thinks. And in the speaking and writing industry in North America, if you survey those people, generally, especially if you're in the US, continental US, they consider New York Times to be the preeminent title an author can get. But if you survey the general public outside of our industry, they would consider #1 international best-selling author to be a slightly higher or equal credential to New York Times, depending, like I've surveyed this several times, and the surveys on those ones always come out either equal or higher on the #1 international best-selling author title. So the interesting thing is a lot of people are starting to understand that New York Times is a heavily gamed list. Like there's a lot of people cheating on New York Times right now because there's an organization out there, and I don't want to name them because I don't want to give them energy, but there's an organization out there that makes it possible if you give them $250,000, they
Whoa.
will arrange a system that makes it look like a bunch of your books are being bought. And if you give them an unlimited budget, they'll keep buying books until you hit #1. So, you know, $250,000 gets you on New York Times, and an unlimited budget, they'll guarantee you get to #1.
Wow.
And it's kind of like they've become the steroid pushers of the Olympics. It's kind of like that. And unfortunately, that's created is a world where often the legitimate authors who deserve to be on New York Times are down in the #12 or 13 spot. And the people who are up at the top of the list, or, you know, in the higher spots of the list, are people who have paid their way there. There's a lot of wealthy people who think it would be fun to go to a party and say they're a #1 or a New York Times bestselling author, right? So it's easy to tell who the legitimate authors are. If there's a word of mouth epidemic going on around their work, if you're seeing them on talk shows and on the news, their work probably is high quality, and they probably legitimately are a New York Times bestselling author. If not, they're probably someone who's bought their way on. But as a result of that whole game that's going on, the whole notion of New York Times has become a bit tainted. And so a lot of people are looking to other lists, both for corroboration of the results, but also as just a higher credential or better social proof. And so of the other lists out there, Amazon is the most international of the lists. Amazon exists in almost every country in the world. And outside the continental North America zone, Amazon is the most widely recognized list in the world.
Yeah.
So I normally recommend, especially if you're a startup author and you don't have the bandwidth to go up against a field of athletes that are all on steroids, that you shoot for Amazon and go for #1 international best-selling status on Amazon and try and create some longevity around the title, like keep your book there. So it's not just a flash in the pan, not just a flash in and a flash out. And in the long run, that gives you a lot of social proof, a lot of credibility that your book is high quality and that you do deserve the title best-selling author.
So what's the secret? What behind those who are successfully generating that recognition and promotion, how are they doing it? What's the secret?
Well, a best-selling book is nothing more than a word-of-mouth epidemic around your book. In other words, 200 influential people all talking about your book all at the same time is really what creates a best-selling book. And so ultimately what that comes down to is your relationships, especially your relationships with influential people. And when I say that, don't hear, oh, I've got to be all smarmy and sell my soul and go pander to people. And I don't want you to hear that, because there's a lot of awesome, wonderful, influential people out there that you want to be in relationship with. And you don't need to ever inauthentically be in relationship with people that you don't authentically deeply respect and deeply admire. But it is a game of really understanding how influence works. And a lot of good people out there, people who really want to cause change in the world and do good work, don't understand how influence works. It's really a matter of just understanding the basic principles of what creates influence, what creates epidemics.
Okay. So you talk about the habits that people are consistently good at generating and influence exhibit. What are some of those that you can share with my audience here today?
Well, the very first one and the most foundational one is to understand that all relationships, whether they're relationships with influential people or your neighbor across the fence, all relationships are based on something called reciprocity. Dr. Shonda Perrin talks about this in her work a lot. She talks about how when we're building a relationship, we create cycles of reciprocity with people, and that it's not about a tit for tat thing, like I do this for you and you owe me. It's not that. It's more, let's be people who are really there for each other, right? That's what cycles of reciprocity create. And when you look at how influential people create cycles of reciprocity, in that case, it's a little different about how regular people do it. They create relationship by giving and receiving influence to and from each other. If you look at how influential people operate, they're constantly endorsing people, shouting people out, encouraging people, shining a spotlight on people who deserve it. And in fact, it's actually the act of doing that that creates more influence for them.
So just showing how great the other person is, I guess, is a little bit
Yeah.
more.
It's kind of like the equivalent of taking the apple pie to the new neighbor you just met, you know?
Yeah.
And you know, that kind of leads me to the biggest mistake I see most people make, right? And you know, we've all seen it where you move into the new house and the neighbor comes by and the first thing they say is, oh, that's an awesome stereo I saw you carrying up the walk. I can't wait to borrow that. Or, you know, and at that point we're rolling our eyes back in our head going, oh, who did I move in next door to, right? And I affectionately call that the premature ask, right? And people always laugh when I say that, the premature what, Teresa? But, you know, but we see this in business all the time, right? In a networking event, usually the most influential people in any given room are the host and the guest speaker on stage. And you'll see the guest speaker walk off stage and there's a lineup of people waiting to talk to them. And half of them have a book or a product sample in hand or a CD in hand. And the other half are wanting to buy them coffee or lunch, right? And the unspoken energy of that is, it's all about you. It's not about the person on stage, right? Like giving someone who's just walked off stage a copy of your book is a lot like going to the new neighbor you just met and saying, oh, you're so going to love my kids. You're really going to enjoy babysitting them. Exactly. And that might be true. You might have the best kids on the freaking planet and the neighbor might absolutely fall in love with them. But it's too soon in the relationship for that conversation, right? Because that book, that product sample, even though it's technically a gift, it's really a lot more about you. The coffee you're offering, the lunch you're offering is really more about you. An hour of an influential person's time is not worth the price of a $7 latte. You know, like asking Oprah Winfrey for a latte as an example, her time is way more valuable than that coffee. So it's not really a gift, right? And so it's important to understand with influencers, the way to approach them is the equivalent of taking them an apple pie. You offer them influence, right? You say, oh, I love your talk. I heard you said you were going to Chicago. I know some people in Chicago. Can I maybe hook you up with some additional speaking engagements? Or, boy, there's an award coming up I'd love to nominate you for. Or I know this other person who'd be a great connection for you. Can I connect you with them? Because I think they'd really help you get the word out about your book. You do things like that. You give them influence, which is the reciprocity that you need to kickstart the relationship.
Right. Right. I mean, that makes sense. It's all about giving and then eventually it just works its way out. So that's the giant thing that's of great value to other people. Is that the reciprocity? Is it the influence that you're talking about here?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And what would be the next routine or habit or principle people need to become influential? Because maybe you want to step up into that and you want to give influence. I mean, obviously, how do you step into that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I alluded to it earlier. The next biggest habit would be authenticity, you know, and it's a word that's used a lot in our industry these days, authenticity. And there's a lot of different definitions of it out there. Here's my definition of authenticity. Authenticity is just your inside voice saying the same thing as your outside voice, right? So we all know those experiences where we've been standing with a salesman and you can just tell what's coming out of their mouth is not the same thing that they're thinking in their head, right? You can tell when there's a disconnect between someone's thoughts and their words. And so people can tell when you have that disconnect, right? And so learning the habit of authenticity, always choosing to play with and develop relationship with people who you really do authentically love and admire, people who you think really deserve the gift of your influence, is actually one of the core habits, right? And you know, a really good thing to do if you really want to like build your influence muscle and learn how to do this, because you know, influence really is as easy as breathing, right? And you know, and I know there's people out there listening, they're like, oh, she's giving us all these habits, where am I going to find the time, you know? But breathing is like, you had to learn that at one point in your life, right? You came out of that beautiful and warm environment, some idiot whacked you on the back, you cried for a moment, and then you mastered the skill of breathing, and you never went through your life thinking, oh my God, I've got to breathe for 24 hours today, where am I going to find the time?
Mm.
Breathing is just something we naturally do as we go through our day. And, you know, there might be moments where we realize there's an advanced level of breathing. Maybe you did yoga or qigong, or maybe your best friend elbowed you in the ribs and said, honey, you're not breathing. Like, breathe, you know. But by and large, breathing simply becomes the way we move through our day, and it energizes us and it gives us energy. And influence is a lot like that, right? And when you authentically understand how influence operates, and you start just naturally going through the day, giving recognition and endorsement to people who deserve it, your influence is going to start to grow exponentially, right? Like who serves you coffee in the morning? Did they do a good job? Shout them out to the manager, you know.
Mm.
Who cleans the floors in your office? Who opened the door for you when you were walking into the building in the morning?
Mm.
Acknowledge, recognize, be authentic, right? Because the more you do that, it's like breathing. The more air you have, the more other people are going to see you and know you and want to help you.
Right.
You know, and you have no idea how those things might come back to support you later.
Mm.
You know, I remember once I had a problem with my sewer in my house. Like my sewer collapsed, and
Yeah.
actually was causing like a domino effect, you know, because, you know, this happened, and because the water was out, now other things were going on. And I phoned up the city of Calgary, and they had a team out here, not only the city sewer division, but the guys who do the electrical that unhook the lines were out in minutes, like literally like 12 minutes later. They happened to be in the neighborhood. Great service, resolved the problem. And I was like back to normal within the hour. And I was like almost stunned, you know. It's like, wow, how do you have such a big problem
Mm.
and it's fixed so quickly? So I emailed the mayor. I said, you know, I don't know what you guys are doing on town council, and I know you have a lot of tough budget decisions, but I just want to applaud you for putting money where are the items that are really stressful for landowners. And I said, you know, normally something like this would cause huge stress and breakdown in a family. And our city had it resolved within the hour. I said, I was so impressed. So I said, please pass on my condolences to the city teams that were involved, or not my condolences, my appreciation, sorry. And, you know, 3 days later, the head of that division knocked on my door and said, you have no idea what that note meant to my teams. He said,
Wow.
we only ever get complaints. And he says, we take it as a good sign when we've had a year of no complaints, right? He says, no one has ever written the mayor to thank us. He said, I really deeply appreciate that, right? And, you know, it was so funny because a week later I needed something else involving the city. And I instantly had a team on my door, and they said, you're the lady who emailed the mayor. You know, I didn't do it for that reason.
Mm.
You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But when you're the kind of person that gives recognition to people who deserve recognition, it gets around. Your influence grows. And it's amazing the miracles you can start creating when other people respect you and want to help you. It really is.
Yeah, that's great. As an author, and you're trying to get to these top influencers with your book and that, how do you get to that Rolodex of top influencers? How do you do that? I mean, I know you're giving, but can you maybe give us some specifics there as an author?
Yeah, one of the best things you can ever do is become a hub of the influencers in your industry.
Mm.
You know, and there's lots of ways that can look like, you know, but be someone who gathers the influencers together. You know, you can create a mastermind, like a group of dedicated people focusing on a specific thing, or you can create a conference that brings them all together, or a networking group, or an association, or a society, or even creating a podcast or a blog where you routinely highlight their work and you know, bring them in community with each other. The more you become the gatherer and the connector of your industry or the conversation that you hold, the more energy that's going to come at you from other influential people who really are grateful and really respect you for what you're doing.
It's true. It's true. I feel that a lot here. So what's the biggest mistake you see people making in building these relationships? I mean, you talk about inviting them. Is there any other mistakes that maybe you can point out that we should be aware of? Because sometimes we just don't know what we don't know.
Yeah, I would say next to the premature ask that I alluded to earlier, I would say the biggest mistake most people make is you know, what I affectionately call practicing at being a writer, practicing at business, you know, and, or even just practicing at life, you know. I am going to do this thing that's really small, that doesn't really matter to me, so I can learn how to do X, and then I'll follow my dream and really do the big thing that I want to do that's out there, right?
Mhm.
And this becomes a conversation for us as human beings. You know, we catch ourselves saying, someday when I'm influential enough, I will, or we complain about stuff like, why doesn't somebody just blah, 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 right? But we don't get that maybe it's us that should be stepping into that and doing it, you know? And there's a lot of research out there now that shows that as human beings, we all create our biggest self-sabotage, our biggest limiting beliefs at a very early age, usually when we're first learning language in those first failures of our lives.
Mm.
We create repetitive themes. Like we tell ourselves things like, I'm not smart, I'm not lovable, you know, in my case, a big one for me was, I'm too small to play with the big kids, because I'm really, you know, I'm the youngest of a really big family.
Mm.
You know, and those statements that we declare to ourselves actually become self-fulfilling prophecies that we start living into. And nothing scares us more than really thinking about stepping into our dreams, our really big dreams of being a contribution to the world and being a contribution to society, or leaving a legacy behind. Our dreams are scarier to us than they are to anyone else, because, you know, they're your dreams, right? That's huge.
Mm.
And yet there's nobody out there better hardwired to live your dreams than you are, because nobody else is going to be more passionate. Nobody else is going to be more committed.
Mm.
And nobody else is going to be more authentic in that conversation than you. So give yourself permission to fail. Like, I think one of the biggest things we can do, and biggest gifts we can give ourselves, is give ourselves permission to fail. In fact, I would say give yourself permission to fail spectacularly. Because until you do, you will be afraid to step into those arenas that are really deeply meaningful to you. And you won't actually be as powerful or as influential, or have nearly as much fun in life.
Right. You just have to keep going. I mean, we hear it all the time, and just keep writing, keep writing, keep writing, but it's also keep living, keep being, keep trying, just keep doing
Yes,
what you're doing, and
absolutely.
try something new, try something new, try something new. So,
Yeah.
so you've talked about building a personal reach of over 1 million, which is a huge goal for a lot of people out there. What's the secret to that?
Yeah, it's, I alluded to it earlier. It's really become the hub of the influencers in your niche or your conversation, right?
Mm.
Because when you become the hub of a group of influential people, you actually gain the influence of all the people in your group. Ah, isn't that an interesting concept, right? When you become of such service to a specific conversation, to a specific group of people, that they love and adore you as their leader, as their connector, as the one who inspires them,
Mm.
there's nothing you can do that they won't shout from the freaking rooftops. You know, I really got that the day I launched my book, Mass Influence, because, you know, of course, as the person who runs the Evolutionary Business Council, like, they are a community of people who are really out to cause change in the world, right? And they are just an amazing, incredible group of people that that really stand in believing that there's a better way, that if people just stop self-sabotaging themselves, that we could really have an amazing, incredible world to live in. And when my book came out, you know, we had a launch date planned, but we put the pre-sale page up. Like, the book wasn't even launched yet,
Mm.
and they wouldn't shut up about the book. You know, they started all this background gossip around the book. The book actually hit #1 international best-selling author status within 3 hours of the pre-sale page going up, right? And that was like the gift the EBC gave me back. You know, it's a humbling moment when you get to see the consequences of the relationships in your lives and who you are for other people.
Mm.
You know, and all you can do is sit and watch the beautiful wave of energy going on around you and be grateful for it, because there's no controlling it at that point. It's just like, you know, it's quite miraculous to watch. It's like all of a sudden your book's at #1 in the States and #1 in Canada, and then it starts hitting in Australia and Europe. You know, it took me a while to figure out, how the heck did my book go #1 in Italy? you know, because it's not written in Italian. I don't speak Italian. I don't even know anyone in Italy. And then I realized, wow, the EBC has all these members in Europe that have following in Italy.
Hmm.
And they were shouting out the book in other countries. And so it was hitting lists in places that I'd never even spoken or had zero following in those areas, because those people were so generously talking about my work and talking about the importance of my work. And that was just the reciprocity, the beautiful relationships that I had built up with all those people.
I know there's going to be listeners who want more support in the area and who really want to know, how do I become one of the top influencers? How can they get access to more of your?
Well, whether you're nonfiction or fiction, because this actually applies to both, truthfully, because a lot of fiction writers too are standing for really causing shift in the world, but they do it through parables, right? Like they're having us take another look at humanity through the art of storytelling. I have a huge level of respect for fiction writers. And regardless, if you want to learn how to flex your influence muscle, it's just like any other sport, right? You just got to practice. And so we created the 30-day influence challenge, and we simply help you understand some of the basic principles of influence simply by having you do little 1-2 minute exercises every day. You just move through your day thinking about that thing or doing that one thing each day. And at the end of 30 days, watch what's happened to your influence. Take notice of what's going on in your life, because you'll really see a shift if you work through the 30 days of exercises. And so if you come to massinfluencethebook.com, you can both sign up for our 30-day influence challenge there. And we give you the gift of the digital version of my book. We now give out complimentary. So if you go on iTunes or Kobo or iBooks or Kindle, you can download the digital version of Mass Influence complimentary. So come do the 30-day influence challenge and come enjoy my book. It's full of cartoons and quick exercises, super easy read. And just, watch what happens to the impact you want to have on the world.
Awesome. It was very inspiring just listening and you feel very calm, and you think, wow, okay, I can do this. But it is a mentality. It's a shift you can feel in how you approach things, and instead of seeing it as a challenge, but embracing it. And I think that's really, really great. So I have been on there. I've done the 30-day challenge, and I highly encourage everyone to go in and participate. And I just want to thank you so much for coming in today and talking to us. Was there any last minute ideas you had out there, a little last bit of wisdom you wanted to share with us before we sign off for today?
Oh, I would just say step into your dreams, because until you do, you're just dreaming. So give yourself permission to play big.
That's great. Thank you so much, Teresa. We look forward to seeing you, and thank you for joining us in Publishing Power.
Thank you for having me. It was a joy to be here.
Thank you.